I went to cancel my Canva subscription the other day and check out what popped up. Now look at this thing. They're listing out exactly what I'm using and how many times. You can see I'm using their premium elements 114 times, the background remover 104 times, and the magic eraser 22 times. Now this thing is sick. Most SaaS companies don't have this type of experience. If you made it to their cancellation flow, maybe they'll show you a list of some of their premium features that you're going to lose access to when you cancel your plan, but Canva shows you exactly what you're already using and how often. Honestly, it's brilliant psychology because now I'm thinking, wait a second, what were the premium elements that I was using? Maybe I do need this. And that, if we can get folks to pause, that psychology is the difference between a 10% save rate and a 50% save rate. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to break it down for you. Why this works, the psychology behind it, how to implement this in your SaaS business, the biggest mistake that teams make when thinking about churn reduction, and some real data on what this actually does to churn. By the end of this video, you're gonna have a roadmap that you can hand off to your product team tomorrow. Now, side note, before we get into it, if you're leading the team who's responsible for growth, product retention, churn reduction, whatever it is, and you're trying to have more impact, more influence in your role, it's exactly what I do in my one-to-one coaching. There's no pressure to work with me. You just want to put it out there. There'll be links in the description below if you're interested and want to learn a little bit more. Otherwise, let's talk about the uncomfortable truth, which is by the time a user hits that cancellation page, most of us, it's already too late, right? Churn, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the last step in a long process where someone's mind has already been made up. The signs are there, right? If you look at the data, they've stopped signing in. They've stopped completing a lot of the key actions. They stopped coming back to the parts of the product that we know are the stickiest. Those are the early warning signs when you look inside of the CRM. And the reality is that's where a lot of the early retention gains are actually hiding, because by the time somebody visits our cancellation page, it is much harder to save them. So if you can catch those signals early and respond with the right nudges, the right reminders, the right emails, the right value framing, you can save a meaningful percentage of those users before they ever think about canceling. But very few SaaS companies actually prioritize reducing churn inside of the product when they're actually going through that cancellation flow. Or at least at the companies where I've worked, it's been really hard to prioritize this stuff internally. Instead, everybody obsesses over acquiring new signups, onboarding them inside of the tool, and obsessing over converting free to paid. I get that stuff, but it's after all that, after we spent all that time and money and effort to acquire high-value users, we basically ignore the very end of the journey, which is wild. Because at scale, churn becomes one of the biggest growth levers in the business. Now, even though churn is a little bit too late, the cancellation moment really matters. This is our last chance to remind someone of the value that they were getting. Now, we could save them by doing some horrible things, some black hat stuff, by injecting lots of friction, making it really hard to find the cancellation page, making it hard to actually go through with the cancel, maybe forcing someone to pick up a phone and call our support team or submit a ticket or something like that. A lot of gyms are notorious for making it difficult and painful and having this negative brand experience during the cancellation, but you can be more successful and have a way better brand experience just by leaning into clarity. And Canva is one of the best examples of this done well. And we're not talking about UI or UX. We're talking about it because it's a masterclass in value communication at the exact moment when most companies give up on the user and on the account. Now, before I go into the specifics of Canva's flow and why I think it works so well, there's a totally fair question to ask, which is, does this stuff actually work? That's at least what I would be thinking. Now, quick disclosure, this video is not sponsored in any way, but I wanted to share some real data with you. So I reached out to some of my friends at Churn, which is a software company that helps other software products spot at-risk accounts and save and reduce churn. They shared some aggregated data across all of their customers. It has not been shared with anybody else before today about what actually works when it comes to reducing churn. And the results are pretty eye-opening. I'm going to highlight 4 things that are really impactful in the data that supports it. So first is loss aversion. Essentially, when teams include clear loss aversion messaging, basically reminding users what they're going to lose access to, highlighting unused credits, maybe listing out the features that are included in their plan that they're using, what they see is over 55% of users who see that screen will then abandon out of the cancellation flow entirely. Meaning, they keep on using their current version of the product, which is pretty impressive. More than half, 55%. And the users who don't abandon on that first screen, if there's a subsequent screen, typically what they see is another 10% get saved at later steps in the flow. So even just sequencing this stuff correctly can create a massive lift. Now, the second thing that they see having a big impact on churn reduction are offers. Because if you can include a targeted offer, let's say a pause or a special discount, something like that, they see about 53% of users who see that offer, again, will abandon the churn experience. So it's not everyone, but it's enough that this becomes a pretty major growth lever. The third most impactful tool are surveys. Just asking someone why they want to cancel. You can be a simple structured dropdown, something like that, or an open-ended form field leads to about 30%, which is about 1 in 3% of users abandoning the churn flow at that survey step. And the fourth is just going to be a confirmation step. Basically a double opt-out. Something that says, hey, just to confirm, are you absolutely sure that you really want to cancel? Just having that experience saves around another 10% of users who see it. So individually, some of these things are more impactful than others, but together, if you can stack a few of these, the story becomes really exciting. So if you can understand why people want to churn, use those responses to give them something personalized, something customized based on the reason why they're thinking about churning, and then sequencing a few of these steps intentionally, you can save a very meaningful percentage of your users without having to rely on any of the icky stuff, the dark patterns, without the crazy friction and the bad UX. And that's the context for why Canva's flow works so well. So now let's double click on what they actually did inside of the flow. Now, when you go to cancel your plan, and you click cancel, the very first thing that you see is exactly what we saw in the churn key data, a special offer, right? A very large percentage of people who see this special offer will decide not continue with the churn, either by pausing it, taking us up on the offer, or just by changing their mind with the description and the copy that we're using here. Now, let's assume that I continue with my cancellation. When I do, then I get a list of exactly what we looked at in the beginning of this video, all of the features that are included in my current paid plan and how many times I'm using them. That loss aversion copy, which we've seen, saves a lot of people who see this end up understanding how much of the tool they're using and continuing on without canceling. But let's say I see this and I want to continue on. Then I get to this page, which is the survey. Again, 1 out of 3 people who see this survey and answer some information are more likely to stick around. And there may even be, on some of these answers, another hidden special offer in my email or even in the next step of this process. So it's a pretty straightforward, but a very compelling experience that's super clear from a user's perspective. And from what we just saw, they stack a lot of the most effective churn-saving flows inside of their experience. Now, to understand why this works, there's a few psychological principles that can help us detangle why it's so effective from a user's perspective. At the top of the list would be something called motivated reasoning. Essentially, most users arrive at this cancellation page with a story already formed in their mind. The story probably sounds something like, hey, I just don't use this thing enough. It's not worth me paying whatever the price is for it. I should cancel. And that story, by the time you're here, you're pretty settled on. But again, the data contradicts this. The brain pauses just enough for us to reconsider if we might want to continue on, and that's where having the different special offers and things can be helpful. The second psychological reason this is so impactful is personalization, right? Our message is personalized. We're collecting the churn reasons. We've customized and personalized the exact parts of the tool that we're using. That makes it feel important. It's not a generic one-to-many marketing message. It's about me and my plan. We know in other areas of our business, personalized messages are more effective, harder to ignore, more impactful. The third is something called the endowment effect. This is really about ownership kicking in, right? This is my plan. I'm using these tools. I actually rely on this more than I thought that I would. That usage data creates some more emotional attachment. And finally, we've talked about this a few times already, but loss aversion. Once that ownership is established, showing exactly what someone is about to lose hits way harder than just listing out a generic list of benefits. That loss feels more painful than upside feels good. And that's why that moment is so impactful and why so many users stop and abandon out of the churn flow, that loss aversion. And for what it's worth, this is the same playbook that a lot of companies are using elsewhere inside of their growth model, in their acquisition campaigns, in their onboarding flows, in their pricing and upsell psychology. We're just applying it at the very end of the journey. And that's the real insight for me. So the lesson here isn't just copy Canva. The lesson is that we want to bring the same rigor, the same personalization, experimentation to our retention programs that we've already brought elsewhere in the business. Because we know that companies spend enormous amounts of time getting folks to sign up, getting them to experience value into the tool, converting that value into paid subscribers, but very little time and resources into helping them stay. And once your product hits scale, retention becomes one of the biggest growth levers that you have. But for whatever reason, and because I'm a growth nerd, I go around, I sign up for tools, and I look at all these flows. Most of them are generic. They haven't been tested. They're not personalized. They don't leverage segmentation, and they don't reflect real value back to the user. Usually they're afterthoughts. At least that's how they look. So if you want to apply this to your business without copying Canva, here's how to think about it. The first thing I would do is collect a bunch of open-ended reasons why people are churning. You can do this with a survey or an email or something like that. You don't want to be guessing why they're churning. You want to get some real data. The second thing I would do is, after analyzing that data, see if you can identify the top 2 or 3 reasons why people leave. That's where all the leverage is. The third step is, once we understand the top 2 or 3 reasons why people are churning. We want to build some experiments around each one of those reasons. So if somebody says, I don't use it enough, we might want to experiment with showing some of that usage data, leveraging loss aversion. If they say it's too expensive, we might want to leverage a special offer or a pause. And if they say it's missing some important feature that I think is critical to my success, let them know what's on the roadmap and what's coming down the line. The main takeaway for me is we want to bring the same sophistication that we're using elsewhere in the business. Segmentation, personalization, value framing, and A/B testing. You already know this stuff works, just haven't been applying it to your cancellation. And if you're leading the teams who are responsible for this stuff, if you're leading a growth team, a product team, a retention team, and you're trying to have more influence and impact in that role, that's exactly what I work on with my coaching clients, helping leaders step back, think more strategically, build some of the systems that their team can actually run day to day without them having to be in every single detail of the project. You can find all the details for that linked below. And if this breakdown was helpful, hit subscribe. I share videos like this every week. I'll see you in the next one.